Imagine an unstoppable war machine, 86,000 battle-hardened warriors stretching across the horizon like a human tidal wave. The largest fighting force a civilization has ever mobilized, advancing with absolute confidence toward a single objective: hunt down and obliterate their most dangerous adversary. Now here's the twist that'll make your jaw drop. This seemingly invincible juggernaut was about to be completely erased from existence in mere hours. Not simply beaten back, not forced to retreat, but systematically consumed in what history would remember as the most flawlessly executed military ambush ever designed by human imagination. This is the bone-chilling story of how one commander's strategic brilliance transformed Rome's most fearsome army into helpless victims, ensnared in a meticulously crafted death zone of his own creation. Welcome to the absolute nightmare known as the Battle of Cannae, where battlefield tactics evolved into a brutal art form written in the blood of thousands. If this grabs your attention, buckle up, because the reality is even more mind-blowing than you can imagine. Smash that subscribe button right now, because every single detail of this masterwork of military genius is about to unfold before your eyes. The blistering summer heat of 216 BC blanketed the Mediterranean world in an atmosphere thick with dread and anticipation. For more than 2 excruciating years, a terrifying shadow had spread across the entire Italian peninsula, a phantom of tactical brilliance so extraordinary it seemed to defy natural explanation. This dark specter tormented Roman dreams, destroyed their foundational belief in military superiority, and placed the entire republic on the precipice of total collapse. His name echoed like thunder through every Roman household: Hannibal Barca. This Carthaginian warlord, born into a bloodline consumed by hatred for Rome, had already accomplished what Romans considered absolutely impossible. He had led his entire military force from distant Spain, marched through hostile Gaul, and crossed the brutal frozen Alps, bringing his entire army, including those legendary war elephants. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he systematically humiliated Rome's legendary legions in 2 crushing engagements. First came the perfectly orchestrated ambush at the Trebia River, a calculated trap that ended in frozen massacre. Then followed the masterful dawn assault through the dense fog banks of Lake Trasimene, resulting in the complete destruction of an entire consular army and the death of its commanding officer. Rome, the rising superpower of the ancient world, a civilization constructed on foundations of martial excellence and unshakable confidence, found itself facing an unprecedented existential crisis. Their traditional battlefield dominance, the very cornerstone of their entire civilization, hadn't merely been challenged. It had been openly ridiculed and dismantled. Their Italian territories, conquered through centuries of relentless warfare, were now being violated at will. And their pride, the psychological engine powering their endless expansion, had been wounded in ways that cut deeper than any sword. Following the catastrophe at Trasimene, religious hysteria gripped the city like wildfire. Ancient prophetic texts were desperately consulted. Human sacrifices were seriously discussed. Citizens saw ominous warnings in every natural occurrence. Hannibal had transcended being merely a military opponent. He had become divine retribution incarnate, a supernatural punishment testing Rome's very right to exist. In desperation, the Senate initially turned to someone whose temperament represented the complete opposite of typical Roman aggression: Quintus Fabius Maximus. Appointed as dictator during this emergency, Fabius developed an innovative but deeply unpopular strategy that historians now call Fabian tactics, a grinding campaign of exhaustion and attrition. This approach involved systematically avoiding any direct confrontation with Hannibal whatsoever. Fabius's legions would shadow the Carthaginian army from distant hillsides, constantly harassing supply missions, eliminating isolated detachments, and categorically refusing the decisive engagement Hannibal desperately craved. It was a strategy built on patience and strategic wisdom, a brilliant approach that acknowledged Hannibal's tactical superiority and refused to play by his rules. It was methodically saving Rome from complete destruction. But patience wasn't exactly a virtue the Roman public or their power-hungry politicians possessed in abundance. Watching an enemy force march freely through their countryside, burning their farms and stealing their harvests, became an insufferable daily humiliation. Their warrior blood boiled with righteous fury, their honor screamed for satisfaction, and their voices in the forum grew increasingly loud and insistent, demanding a return to Rome's traditional approach to warfare. One massive, glorious, decisive battle. The political pressure became absolutely unbearable. The cautious brilliance of Fabius was swept aside in favor of populist bloodlust for revenge. And so Rome made a fateful decision that would reverberate through history's corridors for millennia. They would assemble the most massive, most overwhelmingly powerful military force in their republic's entire existence, and send it forward with one absolutely clear mission: locate Hannibal and annihilate him completely. This colossal force would comprise 8 complete legions, reinforced by equivalent numbers of allied troops, creating an unprecedented war machine, totaling approximately 86,000 fighting men. It was a declaration of absolute crushing dominance, a statement that Rome's patience had reached its breaking point, and that its seemingly limitless reserves of manpower would now be unleashed to pulverize this Carthaginian threat once and for all. What they couldn't comprehend, what lay completely beyond their imagination, was that they were about to march straight into the most sophisticated and horrifying trap in all of military history. A snare designed by a mind that understood warfare not merely as organized violence, but as sublime, deadly artistry. A symphony composed of psychology, terrain, and timing, woven together in perfect lethal harmony. Command of this mighty Roman host, the greatest fighting force the Republic had ever fielded, was not entrusted to a single supreme commander like Fabius. Instead, following traditional Roman political practice, it was split between 2 annually elected consuls. This decision, rooted deep in the Republic's constitutional DNA, was designed to prevent dangerous concentrations of power. But it would prove utterly catastrophic. The Roman system of dual command, a brilliant safeguard against potential tyranny, now became a fatal, exploitable weakness. The Republic's terror of dictatorship would lead them directly into the waiting jaws of total destruction, especially when facing a singular strategic genius like Hannibal, who understood precisely how to identify and exploit every political and military vulnerability his opponents possessed. Lucius Aemilius Polus embodied the old patrician aristocracy of Rome. He was seasoned, widely respected, and fundamentally cautious, a battle-tested veteran of earlier campaigns in Illyria, and a politician who had already served 1 term as consul. He possessed the hard-earned wisdom that comes from years of high-stakes military command and delicate political maneuvering. Polus wasn't immune to ambitions for glory, but his desires were tempered by profound understanding of calculated risk. He recognized they weren't merely fighting another army. They were engaged in a deadly chess match against the most brilliant military intellect of their generation. He had carefully studied Hannibal's previous triumphs at Trebia and Trasimene, recognizing the terrifying patterns of deception and ambush woven throughout. He remained a passionate advocate for continuing the Fabian strategy of patience and postponement. In his strategic calculation, time itself was Rome's greatest asset. Hannibal was an invader operating hundreds of miles from home, without reliable supply networks, without any significant port access, and without any secure operational base. To engage him on terms of his own choosing was absolute madness. The correct strategy, Polus insisted with growing urgency, was to leverage Rome's overwhelming numerical advantage not for a single high-risk engagement, but to systematically corner, contain, and slowly strangle Hannibal's army through superior logistics and relentless attrition. Standing in stark, almost violent contrast was Gaius Terentius Varro, a new man, a plebeian who represented everything dangerous about populist politics merged with high military authority. Varro had clawed his way to the consulship not through distinguished ancestry or celebrated battlefield achievements, but by becoming the megaphone for Roman public rage and frustration. He stood in the forum delivering exactly what the people craved, fiery speeches mocking the caution of Fabius and Paulus as pure cowardice. He guaranteed a glorious, decisive confrontation that wouldn't merely defeat but utterly crush the Carthaginian menace forever, restoring Roman honor and dignity. His rhetoric was intoxicating, his confidence was contagious, and as tragic events would demonstrate, his grasp of actual military strategy was woefully, catastrophically inadequate. He was populist fury given a sword, a political demagogue placed in command of 86,000 human lives. The Roman constitutional system, in its tragically flawed wisdom, dictated that these two men, with their diametrically opposed philosophies of warfare, would alternate supreme command of the army on a daily rotating basis. This created a dangerously schizophrenic command structure that oscillated wildly between Paulus's methodical caution and Varro's reckless aggression. One day the army would maneuver carefully, seeking advantageous terrain and fortified defensive positions. The next day, it would surge forward aggressively, actively seeking immediate confrontation. Hannibal, observing this dysfunctional leadership through his extensive network of informants and reconnaissance scouts, must have recognized it as a gift from the gods themselves. He saw it as the perfect vulnerability, the central weakness he could manipulate to force his enemies into making precisely the catastrophic mistakes he needed them to make. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian commander was orchestrating a masterwork of strategic manipulation, playing not on physical terrain, but on the very psychology of his enemy. Hannibal understood Roman mentality better than many Romans understood themselves. He knew their profound martial pride, their cultural impatience with prolonged conflicts, their desperate psychological need for a decisive face-to-face victory that would erase the shame of his earlier triumphs. Most crucially, he understood their tendency to allow raw collective emotion to override cool strategic calculation. Every single move he made from this moment forward wasn't merely a military maneuver. It was a calculated psychological provocation, a carefully crafted insult specifically designed to inflame their arrogance, provoke their aggression, and draw their magnificent but clumsily commanded army deeper and deeper into a web of their own weaving. With the massive Roman army now lumbering toward him like a slow-moving avalanche, Hannibal's next action demonstrated the sophisticated, multi-dimensional thinking that separated him from ordinary military commanders. He understood that the Fabian strategy of avoidance, while politically unpopular in Rome, still represented a serious strategic threat to his army's long-term survival. A prolonged war of attrition was a conflict he absolutely could not win. He needed to force the decisive battle that Varro desperately craved and Paulus deeply feared. But he needed it fought on terrain of his own choosing, according to rules of his own design. Rather than waiting passively for the Roman juggernaut to locate him on unfavorable ground, he deliberately marched his entire army southward across the open plains of Apulia and brazenly seized the strategic town of Cannae. This single calculated action wasn't born from desperation. It was a stroke of pure, calculated genius, a strategic masterstroke that simultaneously achieved multiple critical objectives. First and most immediately urgent, it solved his own pressing logistical nightmare. Operating deep inside hostile territory, hundreds of miles from any friendly Carthaginian supply networks, Hannibal's diverse, multi-ethnic army constantly teetered on the edge of starvation and complete logistical breakdown. The Fabian strategy of scorched earth policies and relentless harassment of foraging parties had been devastatingly effective. The enormous grain warehouses and supply depots located at Cannae, a fortified citadel used by Romans to provision their own military forces throughout the region, represented a vital lifeline. Capturing these stores not only provided his own desperately hungry army with critically needed food and military supplies that could sustain them for months, but simultaneously denied those exact same resources to his pursuing enemy. Second, and strategically far more important, by seizing Cannae, Hannibal positioned himself in a location the Romans simply could not afford to ignore. This wasn't some insignificant village. It was a crucial strategic supply nexus that provisioned Rome's legions and fed vital allied cities throughout all of southeastern Italy. By capturing it, Hannibal wasn't merely acquiring supplies for his own forces. He was actively threatening the entire intricate network of alliances forming the very backbone of Roman regional power. He was demonstrating to Rome's allied cities that the Republic could no longer guarantee their protection, that their grain stores and their communities were now vulnerable to his will. He was forcing the Roman Senate and its consuls to take immediate action, lest their entire carefully constructed confederation begin unraveling like a frayed rope. The specific terrain Hannibal selected for this calculated provocation was equally brilliant and deliberate. The landscape surrounding Cannae was predominantly wide, flat, and virtually treeless plain, bordered by the winding Aufidus River. In short, it was absolutely perfect terrain for cavalry operations. This was crucially important, because Hannibal knew his single greatest tactical advantage over the Romans lay precisely in his vastly superior mounted forces. His Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry were significantly better trained, equipped, and experienced than their Roman counterparts. And his Numidian light cavalry were in an entirely different league, the finest mounted skirmishers in the entire Mediterranean world, perhaps in all of ancient warfare. By deliberately positioning himself on terrain that maximized the devastating effectiveness of his cavalry, while simultaneously minimizing the tactical flexibility of Rome's numerically superior heavy infantry, he wasn't just seizing a supply depot, he was masterfully and deliberately selecting the exact battlefield where the final decisive encounter would inevitably take place. Finally, the psychological dimension of this bold move was a masterpiece of calculated insolence. Hannibal wasn't hiding in defensive mountain positions. He wasn't retreating from the massive army sent specifically to destroy him. He wasn't avoiding confrontation through evasive maneuvers. He was standing boldly, defiantly in the very heart of Roman-controlled territory, his battle standards planted arrogantly, his entire army openly feeding on confiscated Roman grain. And he was essentially issuing an open challenge, daring them to come and fight him. For a civilization as intensely proud, as martially focused, and as honor-obsessed as the Romans, this level of public contemptuous defiance was absolutely unbearable. It was a direct insult to their imperium, their sacred authority to rule. It was precisely the kind of audacious provocation that would inflame populist demands for immediate battle, empower the aggressive consul Varro, and drive the Roman army to abandon all tactical caution and seek the immediate, decisive, and ultimately fatal confrontation that Hannibal had so perfectly prepared for them. The trap was being methodically constructed, piece by calculated piece. But the real genius, the truly terrifying brilliance, was yet to be revealed. If you're captivated by this deep exploration of ancient military strategy and psychological warfare, let me know in the comments section below. And don't forget to hit that like button to help others discover this incredible historical story. The Roman military force that marched southward toward Cannae was unlike anything the ancient world had witnessed assembled by a single republic. It was a physical manifestation of Rome's volcanic fury and its seemingly inexhaustible reserves of fighting manpower. 8 complete legions, double the standard consular army deployment, plus equivalent numbers of allied auxiliary troops, created a colossal military force that overshadowed most entire kingdoms of that era. Each individual legion was a highly organized, professionally structured military unit of approximately 5,000 fighting men. Essentially a miniature self-contained army, organized with rigid discipline, and equipped with the finest military hardware Roman industry could manufacture. This wasn't just an army, it was a statement, a declaration forged in steel and human flesh that the games had ended, and the full crushing weight of the Republic was now unstoppably in motion. The standard Roman legionary represented the backbone of this formidable force. He was a citizen soldier equipped with the iconic military equipment of Republican warfare. He wore a bronze helmet for head protection, either a bronze pectoral plate or a coat of interlocking mail for torso defense. and carried the large curved rectangular shield called the scutum, which provided excellent comprehensive protection. His primary weapons came in two parts. First was the pilum, a heavy throwing javelin featuring a long, soft iron shank specifically engineered to bend upon impact, rendering enemy shields useless and preventing the weapon from being hurled back at Roman lines. After the initial devastating volley of Pila, the legionary would draw his primary close combat weapon, the gladius hispaniensis, a short, broad, lethally effective sword specifically designed for the brutal close quarters stabbing and thrusting characteristic of ancient melee combat. These weren't drafted conscripts or unreliable foreign mercenaries. These were Romans, citizens fighting for their homeland, their families, and the very survival of their republic. Their training was intensive and ongoing. Their discipline was legendary throughout the Mediterranean. And their collective courage, forged through centuries of conquest and expansion, was absolute and unquestioning. Supporting the core Roman legions were auxiliary troops provided by Rome's extensive network of Italian allies. These were men from cities and tribal communities that Rome had previously conquered, but had successfully integrated into its vast confederation. Men now bound by solemn treaty obligations to fight for the Republic. They brought specialized military skills that the standard legions often lacked, such as expert archery from Cretan bowmen, deadly accurate slinging from Balearic specialists, and crucially additional cavalry reinforcements. This combined military force represented not merely the concentrated might of the city of Rome itself, but the collective military power of the entire Italian Confederation, a complex alliance system that Rome had spent centuries painstakingly building and carefully maintaining. It was precisely this system that gave Rome its incredible strategic depth and its remarkable ability to absorb horrific battlefield losses and still raise entirely new armies from its vast population base. As this massive, magnificent army, a literal river of 86,000 fighting men, their armor glinting in the summer sun, approached Hannibal's deliberately chosen position at Cannae, the simmering command tension between the two opposing consuls reached an explosive breaking point. The cautious and battle-experienced Lucius Aemilius Paulus, surveying the flat, open terrain that so obviously favored Hannibal's superior cavalry forces, continued advocating passionately for the proven Fabian strategy. He argued they absolutely should not engage on this disadvantageous ground. Instead, he proposed they establish a heavily fortified encampment on the nearby elevated hills, systematically control all supply routes, and leverage their overwhelming numerical superiority to create an essentially unassailable position, effectively besieging Hannibal's army and forcing the Carthaginian commander to either attack them at severe disadvantage or watch his forces slowly starve. His strategy was tactically sound, strategically logical, and fundamentally safe. But Varro, the populist demagogue whose entire political career rested on promises of swift glory, was having absolutely none of it. He perceived Paulus's continued caution not as military wisdom, but as the timid hesitation of an out-of-touch aristocrat unable to understand common Roman sentiment. The longer they delayed action, the more his carefully cultivated political reputation, built entirely on guarantees of quick and glorious victory, suffered irreparable damage. He had explicitly promised the Roman people a decisive battle, and every passing day of tactical inaction made him appear either cowardly or dishonest. The political pressure bearing down on him was immense, crushing, and Varro was fundamentally a man who valued his public image and political survival far more than sober military reality. So when his designated day of supreme command arrived on the scorching morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, he made the fateful, arrogant, and ultimately catastrophic decision that would condemn tens of thousands of Roman soldiers to horrific and meaningless deaths. He would offer battle here and now, on the exact terrain Hannibal himself had deliberately selected for this confrontation. The Roman battle formation that took physical shape on that fateful morning was a direct manifestation of Varro's political promises, and Rome's fundamental military philosophy, the concentrated application of overwhelming brute force at a single decisive point. Varro, in his supreme arrogant certainty, arranged his 86,000 men in an extraordinarily deep and dangerously narrow formation. Instead of the standard Roman deployment, which carefully balanced formation width with depth to maintain tactical flexibility and maneuverability, he deliberately packed his infantry manipules, the core tactical subunits of the legion, much more closely together than standard doctrine recommended. The result was a colossal, monolithic block of heavy infantry, a formation that was far deeper than it was wide. This wasn't a balanced battle line designed for tactical flexibility. This was a human battering ram, a massive concentration of kinetic force engineered for one singular purpose: to punch directly through the enemy's center with unstoppable, irresistible momentum. The logic driving Varro's unorthodox deployment was brutally simple and, on the surface, seemingly sound. With such an overwhelming numerical advantage, nearly twice Hannibal's troop numbers, why waste time on complex tactical maneuvers? Why worry about vulnerable flanks or strategic positioning? He reasoned he could create a formation so monumentally deep, so incredibly dense, and so overwhelmingly powerful that absolutely no enemy defensive line could possibly withstand its sheer physical and psychological impact. They would advance in one massive unstoppable column straight toward what he perceived as the weakest structural point of Hannibal's army, the Gallic and Spanish infantry holding the center, and simply smash clean through their lines like a hammer through pottery. Once they had catastrophically shattered the enemy's central core, the legions could then systematically pivot and methodically roll up the remaining Carthaginian forces from the inside outward, like peeling apart a broken shell. It was warfare reduced to its most primitive and arrogant equation: mass multiplied by velocity equals an unstoppable battle-winning force. It was a tactical plan that relied entirely on a single massive hammer blow, with absolutely no contingency planning for what might occur if that devastating blow failed to land as anticipated. The Roman cavalry, perpetually the weakest component of the Republic's military structure, was positioned on the wings according to long-established tradition. The smaller force of Roman citizen cavalry was stationed on the right flank, positioned near the winding Aufidus River, while the more numerous allied Italian cavalry held the left flank on the open plain. But in Varro's strategic calculation, and indeed in the military thinking of most traditional Roman commanders, their role was fundamentally secondary to the main action. They existed primarily to protect the vulnerable flanks of the main infantry formation and, hopefully, to pursue and cut down fleeing enemies once the battle was decisively won by infantry action. Everyone involved understood that this engagement, according to Roman tactical planning, would ultimately be decided by the brutal head-on collision of massed heavy infantry in the center. The entire Roman strategy fundamentally relied on two core unquestioned assumptions: the inherent superiority of their disciplined heavy infantry and the overwhelming decisive power of their massive numerical advantage. They were essentially gambling the entire fate of the Republic on a single colossal frontal charge, a spectacular display of pure kinetic energy specifically designed to shatter the Carthaginian army and permanently erase the lingering shame of their previous humiliating defeats. It was a battle plan born from dangerous arrogance, political impatience, and a profound, fatal underestimation of the sophisticated mind commanding their opponent. What confronted the advancing Roman juggernaut across the dusty plain appeared, to the arrogant eyes of Consul Varro, almost suicidally overconfident, a deployment seemingly riddled with obvious exploitable weaknesses. But this was absolutely no mistake, no oversight born of desperation. Hannibal had arranged his approximately 50,000 fighting men not merely as a conventional battle line, but as the precisely calibrated components of a giant mechanical trap. Every single placement, every calculated angle, Every unit's specific position had been determined with the mathematical precision of a master engineer designing an intricate machine specifically for systematic slaughter. In the very center of his formation, positioned directly in the anticipated path of the massive Roman battering ram, Hannibal deliberately placed his weakest and least reliable troops, his Spanish and Gallic infantry warriors. These were undeniably brave and ferocious fighters, armed with traditional long swords and fighting according to their ancestral tribal styles. But they were comparatively lightly armored and fundamentally lacked the stoic, grinding, mechanical discipline characteristic of Roman legionaries. To the Roman commanders carefully studying the enemy deployment through the shimmering heat, this appeared to be a precious gift from the gods, an obvious and glaring structural weakness that seemingly confirmed the fundamental wisdom of their straightforward plan to punch through the center. But Hannibal hadn't arranged these expendable troops in a conventional straight defensive line. Instead, in an act of pure tactical genius, he deliberately pushed them forward, far in advance of the rest of his army, forming a long, shallow, convex crescent that bulged outward aggressively toward the advancing Romans. This crescent formation appeared to be an aggressive but fundamentally fragile and easily breakable salient jutting toward the enemy. It was the bait, perfectly presented, carefully positioned, and utterly irresistible to Roman tactical thinking. Hidden from direct observation, positioned carefully back on either side of this deliberately sacrificial crescent, stood the true anvils of Hannibal's brilliant plan, his elite African veteran infantry. These were battle-hardened professional soldiers, the disciplined core of the army that had marched with him all the way from Spain, through Gaul, across the frozen Alps, and through every brutal engagement since. Many were now superbly equipped with the captured superior mail armor, sturdy shields, and effective swords stripped from dead Romans at Trebia and Trasimene. They were arrayed in deep, solid, immovable formations, their flanks deliberately refused, angled defensively back from the main forward line. They represented the unshakable walls of the trap. Disciplined veteran soldiers who could be absolutely trusted to maintain their ground and execute complex tactical maneuvers under even the most extreme battlefield stress. Their designated role wasn't to absorb the initial devastating charge. It was to wait with iron patience for the jaws of the trap to methodically close around their victims. On the wings, Hannibal deployed his truly decisive weapon, the military arm he knew with absolute certainty the Romans could not possibly match. On his left wing, facing the weaker Roman citizen cavalry, he positioned his superb Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry under the direct personal command of his trusted brother Hasdrubal. These were superior horsemen, better trained, more heavily armored, and far more experienced than their Roman counterparts. Their assigned task was brutally simple: systematically shatter the Roman right wing, then execute a complex, battle-winning maneuver behind enemy lines. On his right wing, facing the more numerous Roman allied cavalry forces, he deployed his legendary Numidian light cavalry under the command of the skilled Maharbal. These were widely recognized as the finest mounted skirmishers in the entire Mediterranean world, men who rode without saddles or even bridles, who could relentlessly harass enemy formations with swarms of accurately thrown javelins and then seemingly vanish into thin air. Their designated mission wasn't to achieve a decisive breakthrough against superior numbers. It was to fix the enemy cavalry in place, keep them constantly occupied and confused, and prevent them from interfering with the primary infantry engagement. Every single element of this meticulously crafted deployment was a precisely calibrated component of a single terrifying machine, engineered with one clear purpose: to create the perfect, inescapable killing trap. The deliberately weak, bulging center was specifically designed to give ground gradually, to bend under pressure, and eventually appear to break, systematically drawing the overconfident Roman legions deeper and deeper into a progressively tightening pocket. The strong, refused flanks of elite African infantry would then hold the trapped Romans firmly in place, preventing them from spreading outward or maneuvering laterally to escape. And the vastly superior cavalry forces, having decisively won their respective battles on both wings, would then seal the trap completely from behind, ensuring that once the 86,000 men of the Roman army had walked confidently into the killing box, not a single soldier would be able to escape alive. As dawn broke over the plain of Cannae on that sweltering August morning, the very air itself seemed to thicken with palpable electric tension. It carried the distinctive sounds of tens of thousands of men preparing mentally and spiritually to meet their respective gods. The rhythmic metallic clatter of armor being carefully fastened, the sharp, distinctive scraping sound of wet whetstones being methodically drawn across gladius blades, the low, murmuring sound of desperate prayers being offered to Jupiter, Mars, Baal Hammon, and 100 other divine protectors. This was the timeless symphony of impending large-scale violence, the final quiet moments of tense anticipation before the horrific storm of steel and blood would be unleashed upon the parched, dusty earth. When Consul Varro, brimming with confidence in his plan and his overwhelming numbers, gave the decisive signal to advance, the Roman legions surged forward with a single thunderous collective roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the plain beneath their feet. This was Roman warfare in its purest, most terrifying and awe-inspiring form. 86,000 disciplined fighting men, a literal moving city constructed of iron and bronze, advancing in near perfectly synchronized ranks that had been drilled into them through endless training. Their distinctive red shields, the scuta, were locked tightly together, forming a moving wall of imperial power and unstoppable momentum. Their spears bristled menacingly over the top of this wall, creating a dense forest of sharpened iron death. The sight of this human juggernaut, this seemingly inexorable tide of disciplined fury advancing in perfect unison beneath 1,000 fluttering military standards, must have been simultaneously magnificent and utterly terrifying to behold. Their singular target, the deliberately exposed, bulging crescent of Spanish and Gallic warriors forming Hannibal's center. The initial collision was absolutely spectacular and brutally, horrifically violent. The Spanish and Gallic troops, fully understanding their vital sacrificial role in their general's intricate plan, met the thundering Roman charge not with brittle, hesitant defense, but with the ferocious ancestral courage of their warrior traditions. Steel rang against steel with ear-splitting, deafening force as the Roman pila slammed into shields, followed immediately by the horrific grinding, crunching sound of two massive infantry formations violently mashing together in desperate close combat. Men screamed in pain and terror, fought with savage desperation, and died in chaotic, brutal melee at the initial point of impact. The fine dust of the Apulian plain, violently kicked up by the struggling mass of over 100,000 men locked in mortal combat, began rising in great choking clouds that would soon obscure even the burning sun above. For the Roman commanders observing from their vantage points, and especially for Varro himself, everything appeared to be proceeding exactly according to his straightforward plan, a perfect validation of his brute force strategy and his political promises. The enemy center, precisely as they had confidently predicted, was visibly buckling under the tremendous, overwhelming pressure of their massively deep formation. They could clearly see Hannibal's Celtic and Iberian troops being physically pushed backward, their defensive line visibly bending and steadily giving way. The Romans could physically feel the undeniable forward momentum of their colossal formation, the sheer unstoppable kinetic energy of their relentless advance as they drove deeper and deeper into what they genuinely believed was a rapidly collapsing enemy line. Intoxicated by this apparent stunning success, Varro made what he considered a brilliant tactical decision. He ordered his reserve legions, the veteran triarii, to move forward from their rear positions and feed directly into the attacking center, adding even more crushing weight to what he was. Absolutely certain was the decisive, battle-winning breakthrough. But what the Romans arrogantly perceived as a glorious, inevitable victory was, in horrifying reality, the beginning of their own systematic destruction. Hannibal, riding alertly along the line directly behind his embattled troops, was not experiencing panic or desperation. He was in complete masterful control, personally directing the carefully choreographed retreat with hand signals and messengers. His center wasn't chaotically breaking under overwhelming pressure. It was bending with carefully controlled, elastic discipline, exactly as he had meticulously planned and prepared. The convex crescent, the shallow bow that had initially bulged confidently outward toward the Romans, was now slowly, deliberately and inexorably transforming into a deep concave U shape, like a closing mouth. With every confident step the Romans took forward, believing they were winning, they were actually being systematically drawn deeper and deeper into a progressively tightening pocket, a carefully prepared killing ground of Hannibal's own brilliant design. The jaws of the trap were gradually opening wider, and the Romans, completely blinded by their arrogance and their apparent battlefield success, were marching willingly, even eagerly, directly into its waiting mouth. While the massive Roman infantry formation pressed confidently forward into what they mistakenly believed was a collapsing, defeated enemy center, the truly decisive action of the entire battle, the action that would permanently seal their horrific doom, was taking place simultaneously on the vulnerable flanks. On Hannibal's left wing, positioned strategically near the winding Aufidus River, his superb Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry, under the direct and brilliant tactical command of his brother Hasdrubal, spurred their powerful war horses into a full, thundering charge. They crashed headlong with devastating force into the much smaller and significantly weaker Roman citizen cavalry force commanded personally by Consul Paulus himself. What followed wasn't a competitive contest between equals. It was a swift, brutal, and utterly predictable one-sided massacre. Roman cavalry had perpetually been the Achilles heel of their otherwise formidable and justly feared military system. Rome was fundamentally an infantry culture. Her sons were systematically trained from youth to fight on their feet as disciplined components of a cohesive legion. While wealthy patrician citizens served as cavalry out of civic duty and social obligation, they fundamentally lacked the deep, multi-generational cultural tradition of expert horsemanship that made mounted forces truly devastating in combat. Their horses were typically smaller and less powerful. Their training focused primarily on basic riding and simple maneuvers, and their primary battlefield role was often conceived merely as protecting the flanks of the all-important infantry formations. They were well-meaning amateurs competing in a deadly professionals arena. The Spanish and Gallic cavalry, fighting under Hannibal's command, by stark contrast, came from ancient warrior cultures where superior horsemanship was absolutely central to their entire cultural identity and martial tradition. These men had been riding and fighting from horseback since early childhood, as natural as breathing. Their horses were demonstrably larger, stronger, and specifically bred and trained for the violent shock of close combat. Their weapons, like the heavy Gallic longswords and the distinctive curved Spanish falcatas, were specifically designed for devastating slashing attacks delivered from a mounted position. Their combat tactics, refined and perfected through countless generations of intertribal warfare, were fluid, aggressive, and perfectly optimized for a decisive heavy cavalry charge. The violent collision between these two drastically mismatched forces was brief, shockingly violent, and tactically decisive. The Roman cavalry line, facing a heavier, more skillful, and significantly more numerous opponent, simply disintegrated catastrophically on initial impact. Paulus fought with personal bravery and desperate courage, but his men were completely overwhelmed by superior force and skill. Some were cut down instantly in the initial devastating charge, their lighter armor offering no real protection against the heavy slashing blades of the Gauls. The rest saw their formation shattered completely, and the terrified survivors were sent fleeing in complete panicked rout back toward their own encampment. But it was precisely here that Hasdrubal demonstrated the kind of iron discipline and sophisticated tactical awareness that marked Hannibal's entire meticulously trained army as truly exceptional. A lesser, less disciplined commander would have inevitably allowed his victorious men to surrender to the intoxicating thrill of pursuit, chasing the fleeing Romans for miles across the countryside and effectively removing themselves from any further participation in the main battle. Hasdrubal, however, acting on Hannibal's precise pre-battle instructions and his own tactical brilliance, did not permit this. He immediately halted the tempting pursuit, rapidly rallied his victorious and bloodthirsty cavalrymen with trumpet signals, and led them in a sweeping, disciplined charge directly across the entire rear of the still advancing Roman infantry army. This brilliant maneuver showcased the remarkably sophisticated level of tactical coordination and battlefield communication that Hannibal had somehow achieved with his diverse multi-ethnic force, operating without modern communications in the chaos of ancient combat. While Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry was systematically destroying its immediate opponent on the left, the other wing of Hannibal's cavalry force, his justly famed Numidian light horsemen under the skilled command of Maharbal, was simultaneously engaged in a completely different but equally strategically important action on the open plain of the right flank. They were facing the significantly more numerous Roman allied cavalry forces, a potentially dangerous threat if allowed to operate freely. The Numidians were universally recognized as absolute masters of mobile mounted warfare, but their particular strength lay in constant harassment and superior mobility rather than direct heavy confrontation against superior numbers. Throughout the entire opening phase of the battle, they had been brilliantly executing a masterful tactical dance, charging forward in loose formation to hurl accurate volleys of javelins, feigning convincing retreats to draw overeager Romans out of their defensive positions, and then, seemingly, vanishing into swirling clouds of dust, always skillfully refusing a decisive head-on engagement that would favor their numerically superior opponents. They operated like a swarm of deadly elusive hornets, keeping the larger, clumsier Roman allied cavalry force completely occupied, thoroughly confused, constantly frustrated, and critically unable to intervene in the decisive main infantry battle occurring in the center. It was directly into the rear of this increasingly frustrated and thoroughly disorganized Roman allied cavalry formation that Hasdrubal's victorious heavy cavalry now slammed like an iron battering ram. The devastating effect was immediate and catastrophic. Attacked simultaneously from the front by the swirling, elusive Numidians, and now crushed from completely unexpected behind by the irresistible charge of Hasdrubal's blood-covered heavy horse, the second Roman cavalry wing disintegrated completely and utterly. Some panicked and fled the battlefield entirely. Others were mercilessly cut down where they stood, unable to effectively defend against attacks from multiple directions. The few scattered survivors found themselves isolated, leaderless, and completely combat ineffective. In the space of perhaps less than one brutal hour of combat, through a perfect deadly combination of overwhelming brute force charge and a brilliant strategic holding action, Hannibal had achieved complete and total cavalry superiority across the entire battlefield. The wings of death were now completely free to execute their final horrifying work. With both Roman cavalry wings completely swept from the blood-soaked field, the stage was now perfectly set for the final absolutely horrifying act of Hannibal's tactical masterpiece. The Roman legions, having triumphantly pushed what they still believed was the collapsing Carthaginian center for nearly half a mile, now found themselves in an extremely dangerous and fatally exposed tactical position. Their relentless forward advance had caused their already deep formation to become even more compressed and dangerously tightly packed together. Their vulnerable flanks, once nominally protected by now destroyed cavalry screens, were now completely exposed and defenseless. And their forward momentum, the very psychological and kinetic engine of their entire strategy, was beginning to noticeably slow as they encountered increasingly stiff, rallying resistance from the Spanish and Gallic troops who had successfully completed their assigned feigned retreat. At this crucial, perfectly timed moment, the culmination of hours of planning and preparation, Hannibal gave the signal his disciplined army had been patiently waiting for. From his command vantage point, he could clearly see his crescent formation had bent to its maximum breaking point, and the Roman legions were now fully committed and trapped deep within the pocket, with no easy avenue of retreat. The signal, perhaps a distinctive horn blast or a single raised battle standard visible above the chaos, went out simultaneously on both wings of the Carthaginian battle line. His elite African infantry veterans, who had been held patiently in reserve throughout the entire grinding battle, maintaining their disciplined formations while watching their Spanish and Gallic comrades absorb the brutal Roman assault, now executed their deadly, preordained maneuver with the mechanical precision of veteran professionals. With choreographed timing, they wheeled inward exactly 90 degrees, their tight formations pivoting like the closing jaws of some enormous, perfectly engineered predator. These disciplined, battle-hardened veterans, many of them ironically now wearing the superior Roman mail armor and carrying the sturdy scuda shields captured from dead enemies in previous crushing victories, slammed with absolutely devastating force into the vulnerable, completely exposed sides of the deep Roman formations. The effect was immediate, catastrophic, and psychologically devastating. For the Romans, their entire sophisticated tactical system, the very structural foundation of their centuries of military success and territorial expansion, was fundamentally built around disciplined frontal combat. The legion was ingeniously designed to be an essentially unbreakable wall to the front, with all its formidable strength and tactical cohesion directed forward in coordinated ranks. They had virtually no adequate training, no established doctrine, and no effective tactical response for a sudden, powerful and simultaneous assault coming from multiple unexpected directions. The soldiers on the outer flanks of the massive formation, who had been confidently marching forward just moments before, suddenly found themselves under ferocious, unexpected assault from a completely unexpected quarter. They were forced to desperately attempt turning outward to defend themselves, a nearly impossible task when trapped in such tightly packed, inflexible ranks with no room to maneuver. This created a nightmarish, utterly fatal paradox deep within the Roman formation. The men on the vulnerable flanks, now desperately trying to give ground and somehow face this terrifying new threat, were being relentlessly pushed forward by the thousands upon thousands of men in the central and rear ranks. These soldiers further back, unable to see what was actually happening on the periphery through the dust and chaos, and still mentally focused entirely on their original objective of breaking through the enemy center, continued surging forward with undiminished momentum. This created an unimaginable internal pressure, a truly horrific situation where different sections of the Roman army were simultaneously trying to move in completely opposite directions, fighting against their own comrades. The careful discipline of the legions, their singular greatest strength throughout their history of conquest, began catastrophically breaking down as confusion, mounting terror, and contradictory shouted orders spread like wildfire through the panicking ranks. Then, as the Roman formation began visibly dissolving into a compressed, panicked mob trapped within an ever-tightening circle, Hannibal unleashed his final, devastating blow. Hasdrubal, his brilliant and trusted brother, having systematically completed the total destruction of both Roman cavalry wings, had rallied his victorious, blood-covered heavy cavalry one final time. Now operating with complete freedom of movement across the battlefield, and with absolutely no one remaining to oppose them, these mounted warriors, flush with victory and scenting final triumph, charged with thunderous, earth-shaking force into the completely exposed, defenseless rear of the Roman infantry formations. The encirclement was now absolute and inescapable. The largest and proudest army Rome had ever fielded in its entire history found itself surrounded on all four sides by enemies who now held every conceivable tactical advantage, superior positioning, complete freedom of movement, and the terrifying, crushing psychological momentum of a plan. Executed to absolute perfection, the great Roman battering ram, designed to smash through enemy lines with unstoppable force, had not broken through anything. Instead, it had been systematically drawn into a meticulously constructed Carthaginian killing box, a nightmarish trap from which there was now absolutely definitively no escape possible.